Hi everyone. I thought I'd make this video real quick. I was having a conversation with one of my viewers who was asking me about what a good book on Cattleya culture would be. So, depends on what kind of Cattleyas, but generally the kind that we grow most often are called the large flowered Cattleyas, and they're the big floofy ones like this. They have one leaf on top of the pseudobulb. They're unifoliates. And this book is pretty good because it's really actually very good for learning how to grow these things, because it has sections on every single species. It's got a chapter on every species. There's 17 of them. The large flowered unifoliates like Maxima, Mossiae, Mendelii, Warneri, Schroederi, and Dowiana, etc., etc. So it's got some basic stuff like anatomy of the flowers. It's got some history on the cut flower industry and the old big hybridizers and growers. And it's got, one of the things that I love the most about this book is that it's got a table, and I don't think this is going to focus, but there's basically two types of unifoliate Cattleyas, and they have different growth patterns. One will make a growth, root, and then flower, and then the other group will grow a growth, flower, and then root. And knowing when that happens is really important so that you know when to repot the plant. So it's got all the species listed, how many months they rest or root before they start to flower, and it's got the months that they generally flower in here. So that's really helpful. Okay, every species has a little bit different cultural conditions that it likes, because some grow from lower altitudes, some are from higher ones, and etc., etc. So for each species, it tells you how to grow that species, and if it's got any kind of special cultural requirements. Like Dowiana, for example, needs more light than most, and it also doesn't like to get as cold as most of them. Also, Eldorado really, really likes it hot. That's probably the warmest growing one. And it also, in here somewhere, has I think it's in the cultural section, it's got a table that lists all the species and whether they're cooler, intermediate, or warmer growing ones, and it's got the temperature ranges for those listed. So that's very, very useful. Most of our problems that we have with our plants are cultural issues, like temperature's wrong, humidity might be wrong, and your water might not be good, or your pH of your water might not be working with your fertilizer, and all kinds of other things. So sometimes it gets too hot and you get disease outbreaks, and basically most issues are caused by we're trying to grow a plant in the wrong environment, or we're doing something wrong. So, oh my goodness. So then it's got a little section on hybrids, and let me get to the cultural section. Okay. It talks a bit about where they grow in nature, and the key to growing orchids well is replicating the natural conditions in our environment. So it's got a bit about greenhouse cultivation, temperature, humidity, air circulation, light. It's got a big part about that, and since they grow in a greenhouse, they talk about shading, which is good for people who grow outside. For windowsill growers and lights growers, it's going to be a little less relevant, but it does have a picture in here that kind of shows you what color your leaves should be if they're getting enough light. Like, that's too much light, that's about right, and that's not enough. But color also kind of varies between species, so yeah. It's got a section on watering, some root issues. It's got a specific little section on, water quality, this isn't comprehensive enough, in my opinion. Water quality is a really, really big deal. Since your roots are the foundation of your plant, and everything that happens with the plant, is determined by your root health. Growing healthy roots is the thing you should be most focused on, and water quality is the basis of healthy roots. And so I think that this is really not sufficient, but you can find more information about that on other websites and books and stuff. It's also got a bit about containers, different potting medium, and what the qualities of each of those are. Growing Cattleyas without a greenhouse. It's got care of flowers, and repotting and dividing. Real quick, this is how all your Cattleyas should be, even though it's leaning this way. Your rhizome should always be level with the surface of the mix. You can always tie these growths back so that it's straight, and I've got a video about this. But if the back of your plant is buried, it can rot, and then if the front of your plant is above here, your roots are going to grow out into the air before they come in contact with the mix. And when they're out in the air, they're really susceptible to damage by bumping into other plants, bugs eating them, drying out if your humidity is too low, or whatever. They're just, root tips are so fragile, and if they're hanging up in the air, dangling in the air before they get to the mix, that's really, really bad. And if you can't repot for whatever reason, if you just take some moss, you can pack it up around the root tips. That will prevent them from getting eaten or drying out, and is really, really helpful if you have some plant that you can't fix. So, okay, it's got a bit on potting on, dividing, and then it's got a section about pests, disease, and environmental problems. Most books don't talk about environmental problems specifically. They just kind of cover it in the cultural section and then don't really talk about that. They just talk about pests and diseases. So, they've got scale, mealybugs, cockroaches, snails. Specifically, they have a section on pests attacking Cattleya roots, which is helpful. They've got one on pests that affect Cattleya flowers. And they have, then they have a few diseases. This is not a comprehensive list. And this, I don't care what it says, is not black rot. That is calcium deficiency. Spotting of flowers, that's black rot. Or that, well, actually that is probably rhizoctonia. But they only talk about a couple different rots, and they don't tell you what you do to treat this, really. They don't tell you what organism it could be and what fungicide to use for that. But they do tell you about what causes it. So if you can prevent it, that's good. But if you're already getting it, it doesn't tell you how to fix it. So then you've got some virus information, color break, watery flowers, sepal wilt, and these are all environmental problems, and then some just freaks of nature, like once in a while you'll get a deformed flower. And, it's also got conversion tables in the back. But this does have a pretty good section on how to grow these things, and this was very helpful to me when I got my collection, but since it didn't emphasize the water quality enough, that was something that I was having such a hard time with. Was I'd get my roots, they'd grow out, they'd get to the mix, and they'd kind of shrivel up. And I thought it was a disease for a while, and then I thought it was bugs, and then finally I bought a different book that talked about water quality and what levels were acceptable, etc., etc., and then I realized, oh, that's my issue, and so I got an RO system, and then my roots they came back like magic. So that's something that kind of irks me about this book, because I had this book for quite a while before I actually figured out what my problem was. So, one other thing, or a couple other things, if you're having issues with your orchids, really good sources of information include books, Orchid Society websites. St. Augustine's Orchid Society in particular has a good one. The American Orchid Society has vetted information, and they have a lot of articles. You have to kind of dig to find them, like other resources, I think, has a whole bunch of articles that you'd never think were there. There's a 3-part article or a 4-part article called Cattleya Culture on the AOS website. That's the American Orchid Society. It's aos.org. On that website, they have the Cattleya Culture, and they've got Cattleya Basics. That's probably also good to read too, but the Cattleya Culture article specifically helped me a lot, and it's pretty in-depth. And then, I don't know if I just said this, but St. Augustine Orchid Society has a really amazing website with tons of problems that you can have, and they are in Florida, so if you live down there, that website's probably going to be helpful to you. And I'd say in general, stay off of places like Facebook and message boards and stuff like that, because most of the time it's just beginners asking the same questions over and over, and then other beginners, and they just kind of perpetuate incorrect information. So, but most people who write books generally know what they're talking about. Yeah, part of learning how to grow orchids well is finding good sources of information. And then also, I don't know if I said this or not, but if you've got a Cattleya hybrid, you can go onto a website called Blue Nanta. It's BLUENANTA. And you can go on that website and type in any orchid hybrid. It will probably come up. Then you click on the name, and then it will tell you the grandparents, or the parents, the grandparents, and then if you scroll down farther, it will tell you the percentage of each species in that hybrid. So if generally you have, like, if Cattleyas grow well for you, for example, but you've got a few that just kind of don't do as well as the others, you can go onto that website, look up the species, and find the majority of the species, and then go in this book and figure out what the cultural conditions for those are, and then you might be like, oh, I need to keep that one a little warmer, or have a little more light, or maybe this one needs to get cooler in the winter, whatever. So that's really, really helpful, and I guess that's everything I wanted to say. I'm trying to talk fast so I can get in all the information, but if you have any questions, let me know, and I'll be happy to help however I can.